Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating but honestly kind of concerning trend in the aquarium trade. We're unpacking some deep insights from a recent post on the awesome blog Notes on Fishkeeping, specifically part 321, written by an author named Ang. We're going to look closely at one very specific fish, the Pearl Gourami XL. We'll use Ang's hands-on observations to really uncover the hidden costs of extreme breeding practices. So if you've ever kept a fish tank, or even just walked down the glowing aisles of your local pet store, well, this deep dive is absolutely going to change how you look at the livestock on display.
So it begs a pretty simple question, right? Bigger fish, bigger problems. You know, it's totally human nature to want to push boundaries. We look at something that's naturally beautiful, and part of us always wonders, hey, can we make it bigger? Can we make it rounder? Can we basically customize this living creature like it's a sports car? But what actually happens when human intervention pushes the physical and genetic limits of these animals purely for the sake of a cool new aquarium display? As we go through the material today, keep that question in the back of your mind. We're going to explore exactly what happens when the endless pursuit of aesthetic novelty crashes head-on into biological reality.
All right, Section 1, Meet the Pearl Gourami. Let's just establish our baseline here. The original masterpiece of nature, the Trichopodus leerii.
Which brings us to Section 2, the push for extreme mutations. Because unfortunately, natural beauty is often just treated as a starting point for breeders trying to make a splash in the market.
Let's actually compare the natural Pearl Gourami to what breeders are actively pushing for right now. If you're familiar with aquariums, you probably know the natural version. Ang notes that its usual body shape is relatively short, beautifully slim, and incredibly hydrodynamic. It's a fish built by millions of years of evolution to just glide effortlessly through the water. It totally doesn't need any human help to be a captivating addition to a tank. But then, we have the engineered variants. Breeders are relentlessly driven to pump out entirely new, unprecedented varieties to give consumers something they haven't seen before. The biggest example Ang points out here is the balloon Pearl Gourami. And yeah, just the name balloon kind of tells you the whole story. They've taken this sleek, highly capable swimmer and artificially inflated it like a beach ball. They're rounding out the fish, turning it into a completely unnatural shape just because, well, it looks quirky or cute to a buyer.
So how do they get these quirky looks? Massive, ongoing efforts in selective breeding and crossbreeding. Basically, breeders work to isolate specific, often recessive or mutated traits, but Ang makes their stance absolutely crystal clear in the blog. Selective breeding for these extreme shapes isn't just some harmless cosmetic swap. No, it very often leads directly to structural deformities. Think about it. When you take a fish and compress its body into a balloon shape, you're literally squishing its internal organs. You're displacing its swim bladder, the very organ that lets it float and navigate. It's not just a new paint job. It's like bending the chassis of a car so hard that you actively crush the engine inside. And Ang is super critical of prioritizing a novel aesthetic over the actual structural health and viability of the animal.
Moving on to Section 3. Spotting the giant variant. Now, while Ang totally dismisses the extreme deformities of the balloon variants, they do admit that some variations in the trade, specifically a larger or giant variety, might be worth exploring.
Well, that abstract idea became a reality for Ang during a recent visit to a fish shop. They literally stumbled upon exactly that, an unusually large, XL variety of the Pearl Gourami. Now, on the surface, a giant Pearl Gourami sounds like a pretty awe-inspiring centerpiece for your living room tank, right? It commands attention, it scales up all those beautiful pearl-like spots, but when Ang stopped to really inspect this XL fish, doing a bit of biological detective work, looking way past the initial wow factor of its sheer size, a much darker reality started to emerge. This fish wasn't just perfectly scaled up like a 3D model. That enlargement came with some severe, highly visible collateral damage.
Ang's direct observations here were actually quite alarming, and they really hit the nail on the head regarding the unseen mechanics of extreme breeding. First off, there was noticeable bodily deformation. The fish just didn't have the clean, natural lines of the wild species. The actual skeletal framework was visibly warped, like it was struggling to support its own mass. Secondly, this led directly to really awkward movement. Just imagine trying to swim with a body that is actively fighting its own hydrodynamics. I mean, a natural fish is a masterpiece of underwater engineering, but this XL variant, it was laboring just to propel itself naturally, looking super stiff and unbalanced. These physical realities pointed Ang to a pretty grim conclusion. We're looking at highly unstable crossbred traits. The genetic code of this fish is essentially at war with itself, resulting in an animal that looks impressive in scale, sure, but is fundamentally broken in function.
So, where exactly did this XL variant come from? Well, Ang proposes two distinct origin theories to solve this little mystery.
Theory 1 is that this fish is the result of unstable crossbreeding. Basically, a haphazard mixing of different genetic lines aimed solely at getting a bigger size, which leaves you with a genetic mess where the body parts just don't quite harmonize. Theory 2 is a selective mutation within the exact same species, painstakingly bred over many generations specifically to lock in that large size. Ang notes this is actually really similar to how the famous giant betta was developed in the trade. But honestly, the origin almost doesn't matter here, because the end result sitting in that tank was exactly the same, a fish heavily burdened by genetic instability.
And that brings us to the core takeaway from Ng's research. Section 4, the cost of unstable genetics. This is where the biological rubber really meets the road.
I want to read Ng's exact quote from Notes on Fishkeeping because it perfectly captures the gravity of this whole issue. Quote, "Unless they develop stable and healthy genetic traits, these new varieties will always run into numerous issues down the road." Unquote. When breeders chase an aesthetic, whether it's that squished shape of a balloon gourami or the massive scale of an XL gourami, without securing the structural health of the animal first, well, they're writing a check that the fish's body eventually has to cash. Much like any other hastily crossbred species, you simply cannot cheat biology. If the genetic foundation is unstable, the house is going to crumble. The long-term physical toll of these traits isn't just a fun quirk for a home aquarium, it's a fundamental reduction in that animal's quality of life. Ng is making a really clear, evidence-based plea here. We absolutely must prioritize healthy genetic traits over mere aesthetic novelty.
So we've seen how the beautiful, naturally slim Pearl Gourami is being pushed into these extreme mutations, resulting in bodily deformations and super awkward movements, all just to satisfy the demand for novelty in the commercial pet trade. So the next time you're looking at a wildly unique, selectively bred pet in a store, I want you to ask yourself, is bigger or rounder really worth the cost to the animal? Are we actually appreciating nature, or are we just treating living things like customizable toys? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep asking those hard questions, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.